Associate Dean in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. I'll be passing the events for this evening over to Dr. Danielle Wallace.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. As Dr. Marshall said, welcome to the College of Humanities and Social Sciences Democracy Dialogues. This is the second installment of this new series, and we are happy to have you here with us to talk a little bit about conspiracy theories this evening. Just to give a little bit of a primer on what we can expect this evening. First, I just want to say that this is meant to be a dialogue, a conversation, right? So I would like for us to imagine ourselves in a room on campus somewhere, hanging out, just having a casual conversation. And the fact is that we have two faculty members who will share what they know with us. But we are, as I said, here to have a conversation. And as part of this community, students are invited and encouraged to participate. So please feel free to put your questions into the chat. I will be looking. You can also raise your hand. We would love for you to articulate your questions on your own if you feel comfortable. But as I said, I will be keeping an eye on the chat and making sure that we are getting everyone's thoughts, questions, and ideas out there. I also want to acknowledge that Democracy Dialogues in our second installation has gone international, right? We have a number of audience members from a variety of countries, and so we welcome you all to being part of our community this evening. So before we begin, I will introduce our two panelists or speakers or conversationalists, and then we will begin with a quick poll to kind of get us thinking and talking about conspiracy theories. Okay, so our two speakers for the evening. First is Dr. Elizabeth Haynes. Dr. Haynes is a professor of psychology here at William Patterson University. She holds an international reputation in the science of stereotyping and implicit bias, acts as an expert witness in discrimination cases, and provides education on implicit bias to advocate for community change and outreach. Dr. Haynes is an active research scientist in stereotyping and implicit bias and has authored over 20 peer-reviewed articles and chapters, one book, and has made over 150 presentations on the science of stereotyping. Our second presenter is Dr. Pete Mandic. Dr. Mandic is a professor of philosophy at William Patterson University, New Jersey. He earned his PhD in philosophy, neuroscience, psychology at Washington University, St. Louis in 2000. And he is the author of This is Philosophy of Mind, Key Terms in Philosophy of Mind, and co-author of Cognitive Science, An Introduction to the Mind and Brain, and co-editor of Philosophy and the Neurosciences, A Reader. Everyone, please welcome our conversationalists for the evening. Okay, so before we begin, or as a beginning, I am going to launch a poll for everyone to, again, help us think about this issue of conspiracy theories. So I have launched it, and I would ask that you please respond. Okay, I think we're probably at close to capacity. Okay, so I will end the poll. We did just have someone join us, so I'll give them an opportunity if they see it. Please, we're responding to the poll that is on the screen. All right. So, is COVID-19 a hoax? Our attendees overwhelmingly have said no, with some folks not sure and questioning, wondering, and some saying yes, right? And so I think this is probably one of the most timely questions we can ask, considering that we are in the midst of this global pandemic. And there has been a lot of conversation about whether or not COVID-19 is actually a real thing. And so I think, again, this is a good way to get us into thinking about conspiracy theories, and we can now move to our conversationalists to share a little bit with us about how they understand conspiracy theories, and in particular, maybe their own intellectual and disciplinary approaches, and then we can get into that conversation. Again, please feel free to start putting questions into the chat, raise your hands if you have something to say, and we will call on you. So let's start with Dr. Haynes.
Oh, I was hoping you'd start with Dr. Mandic because hi, welcome. So we did some prep in order to prepare for tonight and provide some context about conspiracy theories. And one of the things that maybe I'll do an interview. Dr. Mandic, are conspiracy theories a new thing, or have they been around for a long time?
They've been around for a pretty long time, at least hundreds, if not thousands of years. And one historical conspiracy theory is one that is was part of childhood education in Nazi Germany. So some people might be familiar with a document called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And this is something that was required reading for children during the Nazi era in Germany. And there are a lot of very interesting parallels between the conspiracy theory there, which was explicitly anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and the contemporary QAnon conspiracy theory. One of the main parallels between the two of them is the foretelling of some kind of major event. The storm is what they call it in Q parlance. But that was in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion too, that there was going to be some kind of big reckoning, a big war or something like that, that was going to, get rid of those bad people and elevate the good people. But another element was something that was part of the Elders of Zion conspiracy theory, was something known as the blood libel, that alleged that Jewish people were kidnapping small children to drain their blood and bake the blood into matzah. And the parallel in the Q theory is the emphasis on pedophilia and the alleged rings of pedophiles operating at high levels of our culture, kidnapping children and in some cases allegedly using them in satanic rituals. So some of these conspiracy theories have been around for a really long time, and some of the same ones keep coming back with slight changes in details.
So that's really interesting, and that really kind of exemplifies some of the reasons in psychology we know why conspiracy theories exist, that they serve particular functions in terms of our psychology. So we do know that they serve needs, and so like psychology, we talk about needs, like what purpose do they serve, and we know that people who believe in conspiracy theories tend to have like a particular psychological profile. For example, I'll give you the demographics, but first I'm going to talk about the needs. So understanding, number one, life is complex and noisy. And so like, how do you understand in a complex, noisy system, whether data is being thrown at you from a lot of different places? The second one is kind of existential, and it's about desire for control and security. And so you can think about like what Dr. Mandix just said, there's a lot of threat going on there. There's these people that are threatening, our values, our way of life, and so forth. And then the third thing is to have a social, it's social, and that you need to have a positive image of yourself and your in-group in comparison to other people. So, think about what Dr. Mandic just said, it's a little bit about like, this is threatening. I feel much morally superior. I would never do this blood thing, like that's totally out of bounds. And it makes me feel better by believing these particular things. And so if you can think about it from understanding, desire for control and security, and then the social aspects in terms of how we like self-esteem, like that's another way of saying it. Those are the three main reasons which psychology has tried to understand. We have lots of evidence that demonstrates this. In terms of like what that looks like, I talked about understanding like life is complicated and noisy. We like to look for patterns and random, in random noise in our environment. And we know that the belief in conspiracy theories actually increases when there's kind of a lack of understanding. We also know that it also increases when people feel like their security and safety is threatened. So that's another factor. These are situational factors and we can almost kind of watch it. And lastly, and I think this is the most important thing, when their self-esteem or their value system is threatened, we see an increase in belief in conspiracy theories. And so think about, and so whoever's on the losing side tends to like, well, we're, like the election was fixed, so whichever side is like on the losing side needs to have a conspiracy theory to make themselves feel good and right and valuable relative to the other side. So those are some of the kind of the functions that it serves. I can go to the demographics, I think that, and what I mean by like who are the types of people, but I really like the psychological ones because those are really situational factors that we can really demonstrate when people are going to believe in conspiracy, which means that we're all vulnerable under these three circumstances. I know that you don't want to think that, but there are, are these maybe a little bit true? Like you can create situations that actually create the more likelihood to endorse these types of beliefs.
So, Dr. Haynes, something you said was interesting to me, and in particular, it sparked a question for me in regard to the connection between conspiracy theories and bias, right? Which is where your work resides, and thinking about, wondering what role does bias play in the formation, maintenance, perpetuation of conspiracy theories?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. We know that belief in conspiracy theories is so related to threat and threatening of values and your way of life and feeling that your group is superior to other groups. There's nothing that makes a more perfect recipe for bias than those two particular types of feelings. And so, feeling that your group is superior, value threat, so a lot of intergroup conflict is regarding who's winning in terms of the values that are being perpetrated to not only it's oftentimes about the children and and so forth. So and so that will oftentimes lead to a demonization of the outgroup or people who believe different things. So it's a natural consequence. So yeah, they are very linked in terms of what we know to be the precursors to prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping, because bias is the catch-all term for those three things that we differentiate. Discrimination as being the behavior, prejudice as being the kind of emotional contents, and stereotyping being the cognitive or kind of how you construct beliefs about what group members are like. And so they have the same basic substrates or precursors. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Yeah. So they go kind of lockstep in hand.
It does make sense to me. Thank you. I also want to, we'll get back to Dr. Mandic in a second, but I just want to also make sure that everyone is feeling free to share their questions and jump in the conversation. Again, this is not just the three of us talking, right? It's, again, this community experience. We have a hand. Danielle, please.
Hi. I was just thinking, because I have a friend of mine where we share like a lot of like philosophical beliefs, but when it comes to like actual like socio-political details, like for example, who should be in charge, what exactly they're doing, all that stuff, we tend to disagree a lot. And he's kind of like borderline QAnon, I want to say. Like he doesn't exactly express it, but he definitely believes that the ones in charge, like there's a political elite that are like doing child sacrificing rituals behind closed doors and stuff. So what you guys were saying was interesting to me because he's not really in a position to feel like, I don't know how to, like economically disenfranchised. So it's not that he feels threatened by the powers at bay. I think it's just more that it's like, there's these new ways of thinking as like socially, culturally. And it's so like, it's kind of different from the old ways of like religion, because he's very religious. Religion and I'm just gonna boil it down to the old school way of thinking, but it's kind of different from that. So I think it's more that he's just afraid of aligning himself with the new, like his version in his eyes is very radical from how things are supposed to be. So he's just kind of afraid of that. So in order to like basically feel better about his own way of thinking, because it's kind of less popular, he likes to demonize the other side, saying, well, you're just, especially because I go to college and he doesn't. He's always saying like, oh, well, you can't believe the institutional things that they're teaching you and stuff like that. And I'm telling him like, there's actual statistical proof behind things that I'm talking about. And you're ranting about child sacrificing rings behind closed doors. Like, who's the one that sounds more credible here? So I found that interesting what you were saying about the 3 basic like ingredients for conspiracy thinking. So yeah, I just want to point that out.
That's a great question. Can I ask a follow-up question or maybe I can make a comment there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Danielle.
Sorry, I'm
Although
just not as articulate as you.
So just to show you like my in-group bias, you know that like anything associated with a self is viewed favorably. And so like we have Danielle here, right? Your name is Danielle. My daughter's name is Danielle. So I like you all much more than other people. So that's a basic effect of in-group bias. So right. And it sounds like, you know, these conversations sound both very invigorating, but is it also to say that maybe also frustrating?
Honestly, yeah, because like I said before, like we agree in a lot of the philosophical thinkings. So like for example, I kind of believe in astrology, but not really, because I know it's a pseudoscience. But that's where you find like common ground, like just stuff you want to think about, but you don't necessarily think it's actually true, and you use it to dictate your life. So we talk about different things like, oh, what if there's reincarnation, and like, is God really like the type of God that we design him to be, if it's even a guy or something, like those things. But when it comes to more solid conversations, like what should prostitution be legalized, for example, we come on very different sides of the aisle, because I'm thinking more of the like humanitarian approach. Like, listen, prostitution is a thing. It's happened in all generations, in all countries, in all societies. So the least we could do is regulate it to make it a safer environment. But he's more like, oh, how could you say that? Like, they're just gonna have like child brothels and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like the actual mechanisms of society, that's where we disagree. But
Okay.
like in the grander, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
But no. Can I just differentiate between ideology and conspiracy theories? Because I think oftentimes like some people like find them as overlapping. So like kind of in psychology, what we like, you know, we're always like, well, how is it similar? How is it different? So it's different from ideology in terms of your belief system and so forth. And that conspiracy theories is about a secret plan by 2 or more powerful actors. Like they're up to something, right? Kind of like the difference between propaganda and education. Education is information that you believe with, and propaganda is information you don't believe with, you know? So we do make that distinction as well. So I'd like to, you know, what is it about, you know, maybe I can put this out. And I know that Dr. Mandic has some point of view on this too, in terms of like, why are conspiracy theories so interesting to people?
Could I
Yeah, that was
pick up
directed
on
at
that?
you. Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
I just wanted to make sure I wasn't stepping on any toes. You know, so I think some of it is what Dr. Haynes already talked about. At least in some conspiracy theories, it's gratifying to be told that your group is the right group to be in, and further, it's involved in a dramatic fight of good versus evil. So I think that's a factor. I think there's other factors too. Like in many cases, the conspiracy theories are more interesting. They're more satisfying, just in from the point of view of someone consuming information. You know, some of the things that we consume are like movies and stories where you know there's a narrative and there's a protagonist and all that. And that's interesting. It really commands our attention. It's easy for us to pay attention to and to remember. And you know, in contrast, like learning how a municipal water supply works, or learning about how like some large committee at some level of bureaucracy works, it's really it's boring. It's really complicated. It isn't simply like, well, this person is evil and they have the power, so therefore they shot JFK or whatever. there's multiple actors doing a bunch of really boring things for really boring reasons. So, so in addition to the sorts of factors that Dr. Haynes mentions, there are other ones where it's just like, this is more entertaining. This is what is holding my attention. Another factor that's closely related to this is the way in which social media and other more recent communication technologies just make it so much easier to spread this stuff. And one example that sticks out in my mind, and it's kind of a fun example too, I guess. Many people in the, here today are maybe familiar with the 5G conspiracy theory that, and this is closely related to a version of the COVID-19 conspiracy theory, that the big conspiracy behind COVID-19 is that the evil forces want to be able to give people vaccines because that's going to implant a microchip in people, and that microchip is going to be activated by these new 5G towers, this new 5G technology for cell phones. One piece of this, the way that it was distributed and propagated through the population, was there was a very popular social media post in which someone said, here's the circuit diagram for the 5G chip. And so this got posted on social media, it went viral, and it was spread to thousands and thousands of people before someone said, wait a minute, I recognize that circuit diagram. That is the Boss metal guitar pedal. There's a specific guitar pedal. This was the circuit diagram for. No one who originally received that and forwarded it to their aunts and uncles stopped to go consult a manual of electrical engineering, because that would be boring. It's just, it's easier to simply push the button of send or like or whatever. There's a picture that looks complicated, it looks scientific, it brings with it the authority of science and technology. You don't really have to think about it. There's no work. You don't have to do any of the boring stuff. It's just like, oh, wow, that's cool, send. So in isolation, that's innocent, right? You push the little heart button or the thumbs up button, or you pressed send. It seems quite innocent. But that is sending this information to thousands and thousands of people, and then these things can add up, and someone can be pushed to increasingly extreme views by the sequence of really small innocent steps that was the motivation in many cases was simply, it was more interesting, it was more entertaining. It was like, oh wow, that's trippy, I'm going to send that to my friend, I think they'll think it's interesting too.
Thank you. We've got another hand from one of our attendees, Claire.
Yes, I feel as though Dr. Mandic sort of answered my question, because one of the things that I've always kind of observed is that people really seek out the information that they secretly want to believe anyway. And I feel as though it's just in the information highway of social media now. It's so easy to seek that information that you really kind of want to believe. And we've kind of gotten just really, really lazy with doing research. And I think that that's really kind of one of the points that I really wanted to highlight. But I think that Dr. Mandic absolutely covered it in its entirety with his last response.
And real quick, here's an example that I experienced recently in my own household. And this illustrates, among other things, that sometimes this stuff can be completely innocent. Really, in small doses, junk food is not going to kill you. One cigarette is not harmful by itself. So anyway, I came into the living room and saw my spouse was watching the Woody Allen HBO documentary that is a lot of people are watching now. I said, what? That just seems so depressing. What are you watching that for? She's like, well, I've always thought that guy was a creep, and now I want it verified, right? So she, she knew exactly what's going on here. She had her mind made up already, and she wanted to watch something. I mean, she knows this is going to confirm her beliefs, and there's something really satisfying about that. We all do that. I'm sure I've done that a bunch of times today myself.
And-
So that's exactly the sort of thing we're talking about.
Yeah, and biologically, it feels good to be right, and it feels bad to be wrong. And so, what you were just describing, Claire, and what Pete was, Dr. Mandic, sorry, was just describing, was this idea of the confirmation bias. When we believe something to be true, we tend to look for information that confirms it, and we tend to not even look for information that disconfirms it. And that does two things. Number one, when we feel like we're right, we actually get a surge of dopamine in our system, and that's a neurotransmitter related to feelings of joy and satisfaction. And when we're wrong, we actually have in the prefrontal cortex, which is about planning and memory, and memory part of it. It's called a P300 wave, and it's actually that jolt to your system when you make a mistake, and it's a pretty heavy mistake. Maybe you've had that when you sent an email or a text to the wrong person. Yeah, that's the P300 wave right there. So biologically, we're kind of set up to look for things that make us feel good and satisfy our self-esteem, and not look for it. The second part of it is about that conspiracy theories are very difficult to falsify, because we oftentimes don't have data that will help falsify them. I mean, Dr. Mandic sent a really great example of that, circuit, but a lot of things are just kind of like hearsay, and they're like kind of like almost like gossip, and they're really hard to document in terms of their ability to not be true. And so a lot of people have as well, there's smoke, there's fire, so if it's possible that it's true, it's probably likely. And then the third thing, I always have a third thing, is about the illusion of truth. The more times we hear something, the more likely we are to believe that it's accurate. So just familiarity with an idea tends to increase the weight of its perceived accuracy. And that goes with all sorts of different types of stimuli, not only the things that you hear, things that you see. Repeated exposure leads to liking, and also beliefs that it's actually accurate or real. So
could I piggyback on that before we go to the next question?
Sure.
I think those are really great and important points, and one of them that stands out for me is the thing about falsifiability. And one way of thinking about conspiracy theories, or the activity of conspiracy theorizing, especially the versions that are bad, and what would distinguish them from like good scientific practice. One is that with a good scientific methodology, the researchers are willing to stick their neck out, or put their money where their mouth is, and be very clear about what they think what sorts of evidence would support their hypothesis, and what sort of evidence would go against their hypothesis. And if they're really sincere in the pursuit of truth, then they would say like, well, I guess we were wrong, back to the drawing board. And the kind of less virtuous response to that would be to just kind of change the theory and say, well, what I really meant all along is consistent with that. You see examples of this kind of moving of the goalposts with respect to, back to the storm and the QAnon theory that a storm was coming. There were specific dates that were predicted that this is when it's all going to go down, and there's going to be a military coup. And then when that didn't pass, they were like, well, it's going to be in March, right? So, or in the case of the guitar pedal circuit diagram, many of the people that were saying like, look, this is it, this is the 5G chip, when they were presented with the counter evidence that actually it's just a guitar pedal, they just like move on to the next thing. There's no like, oh, I guess I was wrong, I guess this was a mistaken theory. There's just that kind of resistance to any kind of counter evidence. And a slightly different version of this are the conspiracy theories that are just vague. So it's not like they are changing the theory to fit any data, but they have a theory that it just couldn't be wrong. So one recent version of this is there's a kind of conspiracy theory about mask wearing that goes like this: that's what they want you to do. That's the theory, that there's people in power that want you to wear masks to prove that they have power over. I mean, how could you, in some sense, that has to be true, right? There's people that want you to wear masks. That can't be wrong, but it's because it can't be wrong that it's not falsifiable, and it's not really actually saying anything. It's not really explaining anything about anyone's behavior, about what's motivating the people that are in power, what's explaining why the masks are there. There's some sense in which no matter what the truth is, yeah, they do want you to wear masks. They do. So some of these conspiracy theories are just like, they're never going to allow themselves to be proven wrong. And some of them are just saying things that are vague. How could it be wrong? But then that's what the problem is. It's not, again, it's not a sincere pursuit of the truth.
Okay, so we've got some, I've been watching the chat and we've got some comments in there. So Renessa said, I had to remind my father this 5G theory isn't true. I had heard of this particular conspiracy and knew something was off. So the 5G thing has made its rounds. Keishla said, I had made up my mind to get the vaccine this week and many people had taken the time to tell me all the myths, but when I asked for proof, no one had it, right? And so there's that question of being able to actually back up the theory with some proof. And then we've got another question, but we'll go to, we've got 2 raised hands as well. So let's go to one of those. Alex, please feel free to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Hi. Thank you very much. I'm a William Patterson alumni, and it's just really good to be able to connect with my community again. So thank you for putting this on.
Welcome back.
Thanks. As someone who's worked in the field of public relations, I've worked in it politically. Also, I have friends and family who have worked in medical PR. I think it's important to remember that, since, Edwin Bernays started the field of public relations 100 years ago, there has been an ongoing effort to manufacture mass kind of consent or through the manipulations of people's desires and hopes and fears. And it has been a lot of science done to, in order to promote, that people doing things not because it's a rational decision, but because it is something that they feel or desire is what they want to do. I think it's important in terms of thinking about conspiracy theories this is not a hidden fact that this PR has been happening for a long time and has been used to get mass consent for things that are oftentimes very questionable. It may be the case that we, as a society, after having been, chronically exposed to public relations, that we know something is amiss because we haven't even been, a lot of this stuff hasn't been rationally presented to us, but rather has been presented to us through our emotions. And then there's probably a human tendency, like kind of having this feeling like something's not quite right, to try to kind of create some sort of theory of how it should be. Can any of you speak to that?
May I? So part of what you're saying, especially the stuff about the PR, points out a difficulty in trying to criticize conspiracy theories, because plausibly there are some conspiracies. There are some things that are worth describing the way Dr. Haynes defined conspiracy theory. There's people, 2 or more people working to some degree in secret to accomplish ends that are in some sense bad ends, they're nefarious ends. And one thing that I think might be helpful is to distinguish between a theory that mentions conspiracies and the process of conspiracy theorizing. Because, I think that the PR point is absolutely true. There's a very similar point about social media. Many people here today might be familiar with the recent documentary, The Social Dilemma. There's been a lot of reporting about executives at companies like, for example, Facebook, that have come forward and said, like, look, that people are people are working to make these technologies addicting. People have done experiments in these companies to try to change people's moods, to try to influence people's voting behavior. So I mean, that in some sense of conspiracy theory, that's a conspiracy theory. And I'm here right now saying, I believe that. So am I bad? Am I doing something bad? But if we shift the focus from conspiracy theories, which might just be a theory about a conspiracy, to a certain kind of process, which is conspiracy theorizing, as opposed to like historical explanation or scientific explanation, the stuff that us professors think we're doing and doing well, then maybe, you know, we can get a better handle on the sort of problem that you're pointing at. That conspiracy theorizing is a process that very often is just about trying to send a signal to members of that are in the group, to try to define the boundaries of the in-group and out-group. It is about trying to gratify people's egos or their political identities, just trying to give a satisfying narrative in a complicated world. So it's that process, conspiracy theorizing, that is the thing that is really worth criticizing or making a critique of.
Thank you. Next, we have Duer.
Thank you, Danielle. This is so great. I'm so happy right now. This is really wonderful and really a model for what we're trying to do here. So, and I thank Dr. Haynes for the P300 wave. I had not heard of that, but that's the story of my life. So I'm going to definitely do some more research into that. And there's so many things I want to respond to. I love the PR stuff. And I think it's true. I mean, we live in a society of lies, right? If you watch TV, you watch people say, hi, I'm Jill, and her name's not Jill. You know, the first words out of her mouth are a lie, and we all accept it. So the skepticism, I think, is warranted. And I think it does. I think Danielle asked in the chat a question about this skepticism. And I believe we should always be skeptical of everything we hear, especially from people in authority. So I think that's valuable. And, Edward Bernays, in some sense, the entry into World War I, you could argue, was a conspiracy, right? And certainly the Iraq War was. And people behind closed doors came up with a bunch of lies to sell us this war. But I want to shift it a little bit because, Dr. Haynes, you mentioned how we're all susceptible to this. And I'm actually always interested in the deep conspiracy theorists theorizing mirrors what academics do, in a certain way, right? They're pursuing to make sense out of the complex and noisy world, right? That's the story of my life, right? So the other story of my life. But I want to relate it to democracy and to today. I'm going to make a claim that we're not all equally susceptible, or at least not all equally related to the questions of democracy right at this moment. And at this moment, historically, right, we have 50% of Republican voters don't believe that Biden legitimately won the election. 50% of Republican voters, roughly, don't believe what happened on January 6th was, they believe that it was, a false flag or something. They don't believe what is true. And nobody said here they're believing false things, right? I mean, that's been talked about. So that, how do we deal with that in democracy? And just one last point, I know I see you leaning forward. I think that's what's different from Bernays' day and what PR is before. I believe, because of the world we live in now, I don't know the solution, how to beat the social dilemma, the algorithms, far more powerful than PR agencies, as powerful as, and propagandists, as powerful as they are.
Can I just, again, point of view is that we're all susceptible. That doesn't mean that we're all,
No,
so I just want to make say.
I understand.
So just my point of view in terms of, like, we all can be kind of fooled, I guess, or have false beliefs. Can I just say that more generally?
I agree with you on that. I'm not disputing that. I'm saying, but as a fact right now in our society,
there are different kind of modes of evidence that people operate on. And so the emotional modes of evidence is an example, or I heard it from a friend of a friend, a FOAF, as we call them, so people oftentimes at other levels of understanding, one story, a powerful narrative is much more important than, 10,000 points of data regarding the usefulness of some particular medical, drug or something like that. So people are not well calibrated oftentimes regarding how they evaluate and understand evidence. And oftentimes there's a difference between the emotional system and the cognitive system. And so, like Dr. Mandic said, like believing things that are hard and that take a lot of cognitive energy, we're kind of cognitive misers. And so if that if we're kind of more what we call system one thinkers, or kind of shooting from the gut, you're probably a little bit more likely to do that. Deep analysis and synthesis of evidence, take a little bit more. So that's one thing. So how do you have a democratic society with people when we all can be cognitive misers sometimes, and we oftentimes think with our hearts rather than our heads? That's always going to be a problem, I think. I think, trying to recognize at the individual level that we do this, and just like Dr. Mandic said, that, don't move the goalposts in terms of what evidence is, like your times when you're wrong, you weren't almost right, so that's a common, feeling with a lot of people. And then there's also something, Dor, that you mentioned in terms of like, how do people believe that the election was fixed? Okay. And I just want to repeat, it's kind of like, it's called the loser's effect in the psychology of this, is that if you feel like that you are on the losing side of something, you're much more likely to be susceptible to false beliefs about what actually happened. And it has some kind of curious contradictory types of things. So just feeling like you lost makes you want to believe that you're right, and believing in, there's conspiracy theories and there's conspiracy thinking, and Dr. Mandic really got to the heart of that. We just call them different kinds of things. So there's a belief in the full theory, and then there's like a belief in like little kind of discrete parts of the theory. So it's not that you believe in conspiracy theories or you don't, but you have some of the thinking substrates or precursors to what a conspiracy theory is. There are, I'm not a big fan of like demographic features that predict a particular psychological thinking or behaviors, because people tend to jump to the conclusions regarding why. But we do know, here's just, people who believe in conspiracy theories, more likely to be male, more likely to be unmarried, more likely to be less educated, more likely to have lower income, more likely to be unemployed. Okay. So before you jump to conclusions in terms of what the cause is and the causal sequence, these are just general group differences. But if I can kind of make a connection to what we talked about before, these are people oftentimes who feel disenfranchised. They feel that there are more powerful actors telling them what to do and how to think and how to behave. So in dovetailing with the psychological aspects, that's important. So I love your question, how you bring it back to how do we create a democracy when people do kind of this losers effect, where people who are feel like they're on the losing side, and we live in a world of winners and losers in terms of being kind of American, right? We don't really have a good kind of sharing of that. So it's very challenging, and when we, there's a lot there. I don't have any good answers. The other thing I want to say is that oftentimes when people believe in conspiracy theories, it makes them feel special. They think that other people are losers. It's funny, that's a kind of an ironic effect of the loser. They think that we're all sheep who don't believe in conspiracy theories. They have a sense of superiority. So it's not only, it's like a way to rectify their low status, it's a way to actually go beyond what most people think. So there's a feeling of specialness that, we're all losers and sheep, and we're just following what the media tells us, and you should be more critical thinkers. So it's an ironic effect, right? So what we just mentioned, like people who are critical thinkers and evaluate evidence, we're the ones who can kind of see through conspiracy theories. People who believe in conspiracy theories think we're the losers.
Could I add something in response to Doer's questions? And this connects to what can we do about it? But also introduces a complicating factor. In Doer's question, he mentioned lies and liars, and in Dr. Haynes' response, she talked about people believing in conspiracy theories. I think that I don't deny that that's part of it, but I think there's another part of it, which is bullshit. In the technical sense of bullshit that was defined in a book by Princeton philosophy professor Harry Frankfurt. The book was called On Bullshit. And in this book, he distinguishes between bullshit and lying. According to Professor Frankfurt, lying is when you think you know what the truth is and you work to make someone believe what's false or what you take to be false. That's lying. So it's a deliberate attempt to make someone believe the opposite of what you think is the truth. That's lying. Bullshit is when you say stuff and you don't even care whether it's true. So I might be trying to sell you snake oil to, cure your acne, and maybe it actually does work. I don't care. I just want you to buy the snake oil. Other times you might say things not because you're trying to swindle somebody. Maybe you're just trying to make them feel better. You're the best dad in the world, I get told at least once a year by people who I don't think have done their research. I don't think my kids have checked all the other dads in the whole world to make sure I'm definitely the best one. It's kind of bullshit, and it's innocent bullshit in this case. But a lot of our discourse is bullshit. It is people not like focusing on lying might be over focusing on just one aspect of it. Yes, there are liars, lying. That's a big part of the problem. But there's also this thing that in some cases is more innocent. It's just people like they're passing along the circuit diagram because like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Do they believe the conspiracy theory? Maybe not. Maybe it's just like, I'm just saying, I'm just passing it along for your information. So there's a lot of bullshit out there, and the bullshit is part of the problem as well. And it might, a lot of the people that are promulgating these conspiracy theories that end up being very dangerous, they might not believe in the conspiracy theories. They're just passing it along because like, whoa, like, isn't that far out, man?
Oh, wait. Yeah.
It operates in the same way as gossip. Like gossip is about, reducing uncertainty when you don't have information. It's usually about powerful others or people that you feel have some kind of control. And the interesting thing about gossip is like, do you know when you ever have a gossip, you're like, oh, guess what I know, and you're like, and you tell it and you're like, and you wait for the reaction. And I think what Dr. Mandic is saying, it operates in the same way, like, ooh, isn't this interesting? Like, I know something that you don't, and I'm going to share it with you. And so there's a little bit of a kind of like momentary power asymmetry. And then once you say it, it's gone. And then, but you're looking for getting reactions from other humans is like a very fundamental to social interaction and feeling good about yourself too. Like I want to manipulate your emotions, good or bad, so that it does operate in the same way.
Okay, we have another hand. Jessica.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm really interested in what I think both Dr. Mandic and Dr. Haynes mentioned about storytelling and how it's can be more powerful than information and just straight up data. Do you think that it's kind of hardwired into us to trust stories more because that's, how we've transmitted cultural information and morals, throughout history? That's kind of like how we've kept our like culture alive. So do you think it's something that's like just innately wired into our brains to want to tell stories and that, gives more credence to stories than to, but is probably more trustworthy information?
Absolutely. I think that it is hardwired. It's part and parcel of us as social animals. So part of what it means to be a social animal is keeping track of the other people in the group, making sure they're all right, knowing who has the power, because that could really backfire if you mess that up and you're not aware of who's got more power than you in the group, and knowing who's dating whom, like, or who's got more money or more coconuts or whatever. So those things are things that we've been doing for millions and millions of years, and then those become like the basic components of a story. There's the conflict, and there's the protagonist and the antagonist, and that just like we get locked into that. What we haven't been doing for millions of years is evaluating statistics, or looking at complex policy documents. Like that's pretty recent invention. But yeah, storytelling is definitely just part of being a human being. It's so easy to get people paying attention and absorbing it and repeating it. Definitely, definitely strong agree.
That's okay. And if I could piggyback on that, yeah. So storytelling does something is that it makes us have pictures in our heads that other types of information don't. And so, you know, as a person who looks at a lot of numbers all day, and I'm trying to be persuasive with numbers, and so there's always a storytelling part of what I try to do when I'm explaining things, because patterns actually. So Jessica, you know, are human. So I like the word predisposed to think in a particular way rather than hardwired, because you know we have our brains are very plastic and malleable, but you know, and storytelling, what it does is, and the reason why it's so kind of strong, is that it allows us to visualize what's going on there. And so it really, what's hardwired is our ability to visualize a sequence of events. So that's what I would say. When numbers are presented, people kind of like glaze over, or they just get the finding, and it's like just hearing the end of the story and not hearing kind of like what led up to it and so forth. So I think maybe one mitigation strategy is like telling a story around data and why data are important, and like, here's what we did and this is why it's important, and you know, patterns and so forth. And so a lot of people like to deal with what we call the example or exemplar thinking rather than the pattern thinking. And if you really want to understand any particular phenomenon, right, like why people believe, like what is the pattern by which people believe things, rather than I know a person who believes this, right? So even though that person is very like, you can kind of think about them kind of more deeply, that pattern recognition is also, we're predisposed to thinking that way, but it's not our first way of thinking. Does that make sense? So so a lot of researchers who understand how we come to know things, or epistemology, say like, yeah, the gut level storytelling is first, and then we go to the pattern recognition and other ways of dealing with it better. So you know, the take home messages here is like, yes, storytelling is probably primary, but there's a correction process that needs to happen too, and actually get into the pattern and more evidence. You know, the problem is that a lot of times people shut down at the storytelling stage and they don't reach out to the other complementary, very complementary. They're not at odds with one another. They can be used together.
Okay. So we've got a ton of questions in the chat, and so I want to try and get to some of those. So we have a question that says, you mentioned the who killed JFK conspiracy theories. Can you say more? Books I've read seem well researched, but the idea of government and mafia hit rings leaves me discouraged rather than justified at the evils of the US government. Is the literature out there completely bogus, or is there some truth to the smoke/fire? Whoever would like to tackle that one.
Can I just say, good question.
Can I give a historian's perspective?
Historical perspective?
Yeah, historian's perspective.
Oh, sure.
There's plenty of other evidence of US government malfeasance and of mafia crimes that I trust the experts on this, and I have not seen the experts come to a conclusion that any of these conspiracies are true. It's certainly believable, but spend your time studying other actions of the CIA, you'll come up with plenty. And that's why the conspiracy is believable. But these are stories that are great stories to believe. But it's exactly that confirmation that there's plenty of real world confirmation, and the same thing with something like Pearl Harbor and these kinds of things. Read real history is my argument.
But do you, historian Dewar, do you believe the official story that it was, what's his name on the grassy knoll? It was Lee Harvey Oswald. Is that the official story, that there was one gunman? Do you believe the official story, or do you believe some version of an alternate?
I don't find it a very interesting question at all. I don't believe, I neither believe nor disbelieve. I really don't. I'm not an expert. I don't trust official stories. You don't have to necessarily, but I'm also not. If somebody came out with the truth that said the official story is false, I'd be interested in that. But since all the other stories are not verifiable, I'm not interested. Again, there's plenty of else to study about that is very important. Like
I just want to highlight.
Yeah.
Just a real quick little basic philosophy thing. Be a skeptic,
Yeah.
or in other words, be agnostic. Many, many, many times, there's just not enough evidence.
Mhm.
And the conspiracy theorist is giving you an answer. We want to know, and it's very satisfying to say, okay, I got the answer now. But it's actually better to just withhold judgment, withhold belief. Say, well, there's this evidence, and it contradicts this evidence, and there's this other evidence, and it's best to just be neutral than to believe any specific thing. But
Yeah.
it's very tempting to just lock onto a theory and say this is the right answer.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and update your knowledge and thinking. So we're not really good updaters. We tend to kind of hang on to initial beliefs and not let additional information come in, and that's a really important point. So I think it was Danielle in the beginning said that she likes astrology and so forth. I loved astrology, before I started understanding personality science, and my framework was like rocked when I was like, astrology is not true. Like, how can that be? Like, it feels
Yes.
like, I'm a Virgo with a Pisces moon and an Aquarius rising, and I'm totally that person, and then I started studying science. Oh, I palm read like everything, like I did all that stuff. Linda Goodman's sun signs was at my bed, all those Cosmo, so and then when I started studying science, I'm like, this is a much better framework for understanding about why people do the things that they are, and it's much more useful in terms of trying to understand people. It is one framework, and it is useful for, I think, putting people into categories is super helpful in terms of your interactions and knowing about yourself and self-knowledge. But then I learned about the science of people, and I had to leave that, and so I had to do a lot of updating, and it is not as fun as astrology. Like, I get it. I've got a 16-year-old daughter. She loves that stuff. At least I can talk her language, So being kind of multilingual in your approach is probably also important too.
Okay, so I think there was a comment in the chat that asked about whether or not conspiracy theories were tied to the human nature of questioning authority, right? And I think that some of what we were just talking about touches on that, right? That there's this desire to just kind of question the people in power because they must be hiding something from us. And so the story that the official story is never believed to be the actual story, right? It's not actually what happened because there might be something else there that, the elite are trying to keep from us.
Yeah, and part of it is a kind of mental escape or a mental empowerment. So you might be feeling down because you don't have a job, and the system just seems like it's working against you. And one thing you could do is to just think in a way. You might not be able to do anything else, but just change your thinking, and you think like, oh yeah, right, it's this explanation, this particular group of people with these particular intentions. That's why I'm in this bad position. That might not improve anything else except that it gives you that feeling that you know what's going on, and that's super satisfying. So it's a kind of empowerment. It's a kind of an escape from this the situation that just seems not just a bad situation, but like, just why is this happening to me? And you at least get that satisfaction of like, okay, now at least I get it. Maybe I won't be able to get out of my condition, but at least I have an explanation for how I wound up here. And it's those jerks that did it.
And can I add something about the secretive nature of these? I mean, because that is kind of the defining, they're powerful and they're secretive and they're up to no good, right? That's kind of the defining feature. One thing that we know that humans are really poor at keeping secrets, right? You know that, right? So I mean, it's especially in Washington D.C. Like that is a place where people notoriously like leaky, and so in terms of like the critical thinking around there, how many people are involved, and remember, the more people that are involved in this conspiracy, the more likely it is to be leaked somewhere somehow and to have some evidence around it. So as a critical thinking exercise, like, well, how likely is it this it can be really kept secret? So how many people would need to keep their mouths shut? So I mean, and we know this from crime and so forth. There's always someone, they always tell someone and they tell someone else, and so people are notoriously bad at keeping secrets in general.
But also people are bad at doing math. And so, you take like, say say it's 100 people in this alleged conspiracy, and they're all like, you know, pretty good individually keeping a secret. Let's say like 90% of the time, 90 days out of 100, they're going to keep their mouth shut. But in order to figure out what the probability is that the whole group is going to keep the secret, then you'd have to multiply 90% by 90% by 90%. And what you're going to get each time you hit multiply on the calculator is a smaller and smaller number. And that's the number of what's the likelihood that they're going to keep their mouth shut.
Yeah.
And so you go from this thing that we kind of are, it's easy for us to understand, bad people working in secret, to this thing we kind of just can't get our head around. Like, what are the probabilities of 100 people keeping their mouths shut like that? You know, even those of us with PhDs have trouble with that kind of math. And if we don't have the calculator, we can't really figure it out. It's unintuitive for us. And so we get bamboozled and buy into something that really, you work out the math, that's almost impossible that secret would be kept. It's almost impossible that no one would have at this point finally revealed the truth about JFK.
Lucy.
This has been so excellent. I just want to add one question. So things that were kind of reaffirmed about my very mild knowledge of like brain science, we'll say, by Dr. Haynes, were things like, you know, we get some kind of jolt of like, you know, positive vibes, we'll say, when we're right. And we really have that really distinctly painful experience when we're wrong. One thing I like to think a lot about is, I don't mean this to sound hopeless. I don't think a lot of adult brains are as like, unless we're very committed to saying like, I'm going to be more comfortable being wrong in public, for instance. I don't think that I could just pick an adult brain at random and count on it to like get better or be more comfortable with the vulnerability of being wrong. So my question for both of you is, how should we go about maybe improving, you know, our relationship with being wrong in the future? One example I have in mind is, I am very happy to demonstrate in front of my almost 3-year-old when I'm wrong, because I want her to know it's okay to be wrong sometimes. I don't want her to think that the standard for excellence as a human is always being right, you know. And I read that in some kind of like parenting book when I was pregnant, and I thought that's an excellent strategy. Now, how do I do that in society? You know, I mean, what are some steps we can take to do this? Because when politicians are wrong, it's like the freaking end of their reputation. We just are not a society that is comfortable with the vulnerability of being wrong. And I'm like wondering, should we put all of our focus into the kids, or is there some hope for like the middle, you know, and up?
So, you know, maybe we just need some really good memes, and maybe there's some hope. You know, one sort of conversation I've seen a lot in media in the past half decade are discussions. You know, some of them are happening at high levels of media. Some of them are just, you know, people talking to each other on Twitter. But there's been a lot of discussion of apologies and what counts as a good apology and a bad apology. And there's a lot of politicians and celebrities that, you know, come forward with apologies that just suck. And a lot of people discussing what sucks about those apologies. You know, when someone says like, well, I'm sorry if that, you know, I'm sorry if you're upset. But, and then they go on to explain how, you know, really they don't think they did anything wrong anyway. That's not a good apology. So there's a lot of, you know, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me like there's been an increase of awareness, an increase in discussions about what is a good apology. So there's, you know, and that's a kind of, you know, a big part of it is admitting that you're wrong. So there's perhaps hope that the media that allow us to spread a lot of bullshit, a lot of conspiracy theories, is also putting us more into contact with each other. We're more rapidly able to assimilate information, new ideas, and there could be positive cultural changes, like a greater awareness of how to apologize correctly and how to be wrong in public.
Thanks. If I can chime in, that was beautifully said too by both you and the questioner. So I just want to say, yeah, being wrong is something that we don't have a lot of experience with growing up. I think that, you know, saying that you're wrong, being able to have a language around being wrong, saying like, I can do better, like, this is where I went wrong, this is what I'm going to do next time. And that creates a lot of humility, I think. And so, you know, I'm supposed to be an expert in stereotyping and bias. Guess what? I get it wrong sometimes. I act and think and have emotions regarding bias, and being really honest with yourself and authentic around your thinking. That's a first thing. A second thing is that some people are just black and white thinkers, and they can't, you know, you're either wrong or you're right. And maybe rethinking about, like, you know, is it possible to hold two incongruent thoughts, or thoughts that are seemingly incongruent with one another? And that creates a cognitive complexity that oftentimes we're not very well skilled in, you know. So can I understand that I'm wrong and that I need to maybe work on some things and still be wrong, but like still feel good about myself, you know? So I think that that's really part of it, you know, too, is that, you know, as the questioner said, you know, it feels bad to be wrong and it feels good to be right, but then really kind of having more nuance around the emotions about being wrong, as not just about that P300 wave, but like actually committing and actually giving feedback to your system. And that's where that P300 wave seems to come from. It's a feedback system. Like, don't do that again. You know, you need to do something different next time. You need to slow down, you know, maybe break it down into chunks or steps, like check your work, not send that email to the wrong person, you know. So rather than thinking like, well, or making external attributions or explanations for why you were wrong, taking responsibility for it too. So it's a complex system. I love that question. I love that how you link it to parenting too, because as a parent, I always tell my kids, I was so wrong, you know, and this is what I'm going to do next time to fix it, you know, whether it's just something, but also in my beliefs or memory is like a perfect example of that. Have you ever misremembered something and you were so, it felt like you, like, I thought it was 2 o'clock. No, it was 3 o'clock, right? You know what that feels like? And then to like, well, you know, it's because of you, you know, rather than like, no, I wrote it down wrong. I need to think about that some more. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of trivial examples of kind of the broader social phenomenon around correcting these conspiracy beliefs and conspiracy theories, but just kind of getting down into the discrete behaviors is also important to recognize.
Okay, so unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. I think this has been such a wonderful discussion, and we've been just, you know, really fortunate to have such a lively group of folks ready to have a conversation about this topic. And so we hope that you will join us in the future for future dialogues. First, I would like to thank Dr. Haynes and Dr. Mandic for joining us and for sharing their knowledge with us and helping to lead the discussion and answering our questions. I would also like to thank all of you for attending. And in particular, we had both an international and a national audience, folks from Texas, South Carolina, of course, in the surrounding community, and as far as Nigeria. So thank you all for being here. I would also like to ask you to keep an eye out for information about the visit from Marcia Fudge, who's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. She will be visiting the campus on the 12th. And so please keep an eye out for information about that. We hope that you will be able to join us for that. And again, thank you very much to everyone for being here and for joining in the discussion. We look forward to future discussions with you all.
We should also thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Hey.
It's hard to moderate two blabby professors, right?
It was easy, no problem.
You know, a lot of work went into preparing this, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye.